I think that tonight marks the beginning of a new level of Christ's passion this week. And it also marks the point where for the first time Jesus really starts to show his anguish that one of his beloved disciples, one of his chosen 12, has chosen to begin to betray him. Because the main event of tonight is the beginning of Jesus' betrayal. And I think that we often tend to think of Judas' betrayal as something that just happened immediately, as something that happened in a moment. But in reality, what happened was that on Wednesday night, Jesus began to know that Judas started betraying him, that Judas went on his own accord to the chief priests, and he started deciding the price that he was going to accept to betray Jesus. And then he still had the whole of almost the better part of a day until he had to actually fulfill what he promised the chief priests he'd do. So I think that in reality, whilst we tend to think it was something that happened immediately, Judas did really have more than a day in which he could have changed the whole of his life and what would have ended up happening. He could have turned around and said, instead of the 30 pieces of silver that I'm going to deny my Lord for, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave it and I'm going to stay with my master, and I'm not going to deny him for 30 pieces of silver. He could have gone back to the chief priests and thrown the money at their feet and said, my master's worth so much more than this, but he didn't. So I think that the real mistake that Judas made wasn't so much that he went on his own accord and he went to the chief priests. I think the real mistake that Judas made was that he didn't return in that period. He didn't go back to Jesus and he didn't say to him that I've sinned. He didn't go back to him and just sit in his presence and let the presence of God wash him. I really don't think that he even needed to say anything at all. I don't think that he needed to say to Jesus, look, I've just gone to the chief priests and I've spent the night planning how I'm going to betray you. I think all that he really needed to do was just to be in Jesus' presence. When he went back on Thursday night, the only reason he went back was to plan where Jesus was going to be, so he could plan how he was going to betray him. But I really think that if he had spent the night with Jesus and he'd been there, and he'd really hoped for a chance for forgiveness, then I think even just the presence of God himself, without even having to say anything, would have been enough to change him. I think that tonight we can ask God to help us to build our spiritual reserves so that in our moments of weakness later on in the year, we can turn back to God tonight and we can say that we begged you on this night that you wouldn't let us stray, and now we're beginning to stray from you. Now our hearts aren't loyal to you. Now we're being drawn away by the devil and we're being tempted to deny you for 30 pieces of silver. Please, Lord, do something tonight. Do something tonight before our hearts stray. And if we remember that in our moments of weakness, and we all have our moments of weakness when we don't feel like praying or we don't come to church for a long time, then tonight God will remember those prayers and He'll store them so that in our moments of weakness He will listen and He will turn and He will do something. You know, you often hear people say things like, God will never force you to do what's against your will. He'll never force you to come back to church or back to Him if you don't want Him to. But I think that almost as ridiculous as it sounds, tonight we can say to God that, God, we're giving you the permission to twist our arms if that's what it's going to take to bring us back when we stray to you. Even if it means you have to twist it hard enough that you break our arms, then so be it, so that we return to you. Even if you have to strike us in our health, even if you have to strike us in our jobs and we lose our jobs, or we have disruption of our studies or whatever, then I think that if we ask God and we give Him the permission tonight, then He will remember it and He will bring us back to Him. The other main lesson that I think we learned tonight is that the love of money will lead to nothing but destruction. And we all know the verses that Jesus said about it being harder for a rich man to enter than for the camel to pass through the eye of the needle. And we all know that love is the root of all evil, as the Proverbs say. And you have to really wonder, why was Judas, out of all the 12 disciples, singled out by Satan and chosen so that he could be the one that betrayed God? I think it comes back to the fact that Judas had such a deep love of money and that for a long time he was stealing from the money box. I think that made him an easy target for Satan. The love of money won't lead you to anything but to destruction. Having said that though, I think that the reverse of it is exactly true. I think that rejection of the love of money will lead to nothing but blessings. And we see that today in the readings of the morning Basker and the evening Basker, that the other main event that happened tonight was the sinful woman who who had the rich oil, the oil that costed almost a year's salary, and she didn't even care. She poured it liberally on Jesus' feet. She didn't even bother trying to open it and trying to save some of it. She just poured it all out, and she wasn't even looking where she was pouring it. Half of it went on the ground. She couldn't care less, because she knew that the money didn't matter for anything. It didn't matter how much the oil was. And it's kind of ironic that the only person who really rebuked her for what she had done was Judas. He pretended to be righteous and to say that the money could have been better spent on the poor, for example. But we all knew that that wasn't what he really intended. He wanted the money so he could steal it himself. So I think that tonight, the three main lessons that we learned from what's happened tonight is the power of abiding in God's presence, and even just being in the presence of God alone, without even having to say anything to Him, is enough to change everything and to change everything in our lives. We also realize the power of the rejection of money, and we also see the curse that occurs that when we hang on to money as though it's the most important thing of our lives. I hope that God listens to our prayers tonight as we pray for ourselves, and especially as we pray for one another. And I'm sure that He will answer in His own special way and in His own special time. And may He always listen to our prayers, and glory be to God forever. Amen.